Today we're doing something, something pretty ambitious.
I think so, yeah.
We're going to crack open the one communication manual that really defined Western thought for almost 2,000 years.
Quintilian's Institutio Oratoria. It's this massive 12-book work.
It is, but our goal here isn't just to, read history. It's to pull out a truly practical, modern toolkit for you.
Right, for the modern professional.
Exactly. Whether you're drowning in emails, trying to craft a post that actually gets seen, or you're managing a presentation that could make or break your quarter.
And we're treating the author Marcus Fabius Quintilianus, who wrote this around 95 AD, less like some dusty Roman scholar.
And a lot more like a demanding but really humane modern communications coach.
He really is. He gives you a complete system.
Yeah.
I mean, a path from the absolute beginning, the speaker's ethical core, all the way to the precise way they should use their hands and their voice.
And at the very heart of all of it, of everything Quintilian taught, is this one majestic Latin ideal. It's the ultimate filter for everything he teaches.
Vir bonus dicendi peritus.
The good man skilled in speaking.
Exactly. The vir bonus dicendi peritus. For Quintilian, eloquence wasn't just a box of tricks. It was, completely inseparable from your character, from your ethical intent.
So you couldn't be a great speaker if you were a bad person.
That's the idea. The whole point of all this training was to produce a communicator who was committed to serving the state or, the community, someone who could fuse wisdom and moral power together.
And that idea is what people in the Renaissance, when they rediscovered his work, just latched onto. They saw it as essential for good government, for ethical leadership.
It's the foundation. It forces us to ask this really uncomfortable question.
Can you truly be a great communicator if you are fundamentally dishonest? Quintilian's answer is a hard no. He is setting the highest possible bar.
He is. And that's our promise to you listening. This is not going to be some academic history lesson where we just marvel at how clever the Romans were.
No, this is actionable advice. We are taking his strategies for arguing cases in the Roman Forum, and we are mapping them directly onto your modern professional life.
How to lead difficult meetings, how to build a compelling argument, and maybe the most important thing, how to build credibility when your audience is, by default, skeptical of everything.
So if you struggle with clarity, with persuasion, or with building that long-term trust, Quintilian basically wrote the manual for you.
You really did.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this system, starting right at the beginning. So we have to start where Quintilian starts, and that's with the cornerstone of the entire system.
Here.
Character. He puts this before grammar, before voice training, before you even know your facts. Why does character for him just fundamentally trump any technical skill?
Because he is absolutely insistent on this, especially in Book 2. He argues that the teacher of rhetoric, but you could just substitute any leader, manager, or mentor, has to have the highest personal character and strict discipline.
Why, though? What's the risk?
Well, the context is that the students are often young men, on the verge of manhood. They're just about to enter public life. So the instructor's character, his purity, is the only thing preventing them from being corrupted.
So preventing them from using these powerful rhetorical tools for, what, license, for selfish ends.
Exactly. It's a direct argument that integrity isn't just some nice personal virtue, it's an institutional necessity.
Okay, so that means the ethical framework of any organization, the whole communication environment, the corporate culture we talk so much about, is set implicitly by the personal conduct of the leader.
Yes. If the boss practices, say, aggressive or manipulative communication or hides information, that license just filters right down through the ranks. It becomes the norm.
We see this all the time. Companies often prioritize what? Technical skill, raw performance, and the ethical foundation is sort of an afterthought.
And Quintilian is warning us that brilliance without character is just dangerous. It just means that a speaker is better equipped to achieve bad things.
Let me push back on that a little bit, though. If eloquence is inseparable from ethics, like Quintilian demands, how do we square that with our modern world? I mean, often the most powerful communicators in politics, in business, on social media are the most ruthless, the most polarizing. Is the vir bonus just a relic? A naive ideal from a simpler time when people actually believed in public virtue?
That is the exact tension he's trying to solve. The vir bonus isn't about being naive. It's about long-term credibility. It's about sustainability.
Okay.
In Book 6, he talks about ethos, which is the communication of your character, as being perceived as good, courteous, and ingratiating.
And why is that important?
Because it's what makes the audience receptive to you in the first place. A ruthless speaker might win a short-term fight using raw emotion, pathos, or some clever tricks. But the verbonus wins the long game by building trust. The audience has to believe your intent is good before they'll ever believe your argument is sound.
Okay, let's make this super concrete. Let's imagine a manager who has to give some really tough feedback to a team member.
A performance review.
Yeah, a tough one. Someone is genuinely failing, but you want to give them a chance to improve. How does the verbonus play out here?
The manager, acting as the verbonus, has to first establish genuine goodwill and self-control. This mirrors Quintilian's whole thing about the instructor's purity of character.
Right.
If that manager just walks in looking annoyed or impatient or like they're superior, the person getting the feedback just shuts down instantly. Because that necessary ethos, that perceived good character, is totally missing.
So instead of leading with the technical judgment, which just sounds like a confrontation, like saying, your performance on the Q3 project was insufficient.
Which is all about judging the action, yeah.
Right. The verbonus approach would be to first show shared concern. So maybe a better opening is something like, look, I know how much energy you put into this project, and I really value your commitment to this team. My only goal here is to make sure you have the tools you need to succeed.
See, that small shift does everything. It establishes the ethical ground before you even get to the hard technical points. It's the character shining through that allows the difficult message to actually land.
And this is so important in all public discourse, especially online, where we mistake a fast response for a credible one.
Absolutely. If you want to resist misinformation, if you want to rise above all that performative outrage, you have to demonstrate that calm, measured goodwill approach. That's what ethical communication is. That's what builds real influence over time.
Quintilian even goes back further than the teacher, right? He looks at the very earliest influences, the family.
Well, yeah, he talks about the critical power of parental influence, what he calls the language atmosphere of the home.
The linguistic atmosphere. I like that.
In Book 1, he advises that parents should be as highly educated as possible, and he specifically points to the famous mothers of Rome Cornelia, Laelia, Hortensia, whose elegant style directly influenced their son's eloquence.
So it wasn't just about, learning to read early. It was about making sure the first linguistic models a child heard were articulate and high quality.
Exactly. And that concept, the linguistic atmosphere, is profound. If you map that to today, the language models we choose, whether it's at home, at work, or even just the media we consume, they set the standard for everyone we lead or teach.
So if a manager constantly uses sloppy, imprecise language, or worse, speaks with constant cynicism and irony,
they're setting a low linguistic atmosphere for the whole team. And Quintilian warns that if your early environment is sloppy, your rhetorical output will be, quote, contaminated.
Contaminated.
In his time, he was worried about native Latin speakers whose language got impregnated with Greek idioms. Today, we might worry about our communication being contaminated by confusing technical jargon or corporate buzzwords or the aggressive shorthand of social media.
You are the linguistic atmosphere. That's a really powerful idea. Okay, let's turn this into a practical exercise, a high-stakes scenario. We're calling this the ethos check for crisis communication.
Okay, here's the mental drill, the ethos check. Imagine you have to break some really bad news to your team tomorrow morning.
It could be anything. Layoffs, a major project failure, a big budget cut. You know this news is going to cause fear, maybe resentment.
So, using Quintilian's idea of the verbonus and ethos, good character, goodwill, self-control mentally, list 3 specific things you would do to show genuine goodwill and shared concern before you deliver the hard, technical part of the message.
You're going to acknowledge the effort that's already gone in? Are you going to acknowledge how difficult this news is to hear?
Are you going to make sure your tone shows calmness, not defensiveness or anxiety? Quintilian says you need to appear calm and mild, not violently moved. It's this subtle balancing act between showing appropriate emotion, that's pathos, and demonstrating your stable, good character, which is ethos.
It's all about front-loading the message with character. The second your audience senses you're losing control, or worse, that you're hiding something, the message is lost. It doesn't matter how accurate your explanation is after that.
And we have to remember the nuance here. As scholars have pointed out, ethos for Quintilian isn't just being good. It's about seeming good, seeming courteous and ingratiating so the audience is receptive. It's a rhetorical technique, but it has to be grounded in genuine virtue.
You have to manage the perception of your character as carefully as you manage your facts.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've established the speaker's character as the foundation. Now let's move on to their long-term training. Quintilian reveals himself as this incredibly systematic coach.
Oh, absolutely. His pedagogy is demanding, but it's so logical. And he starts with this rule that seems really surprising for Roman elites learning rhetoric.
Which is
Learn Greek first.
Greek first. Why?
Well, this is a fascinating bit of intellectual history from Book 1. Quintilian says the teacher should start the student with Greek because Latin will be, in his words, picked up by him whether we will or no, since it's what everyone speaks.
So it's the language of the playground, basically.
Exactly. But, critically, Latin is derived from Greek. So if you start with your native tongue, the boy's mind gets impregnated with Greek idioms or foreign intonations that are really hard to shake later on.
Okay, let's unpack that. For a modern professional who's trying to master a new skill or a new field, the Greek is the foundational, harder conceptual work.
Right. And the Latin is the easy, practical, everyday application. It's the jargon and the buzzwords you pick up from your colleagues or from reading articles online.
So Quintilian is basically giving us a cognitive rule here.
He is. He's saying, tackle the core fundamental theory first. Don't rush to use the practical language before you actually grasp the underlying concepts.
Because if you start with the jargon, the Latin, you risk contaminating your own understanding with misinterpretations of all these technical terms.
Exactly. A perfect, concrete example is a professional trying to get up to speed on a new, dense field, let's say. AI ethics or complex data privacy laws.
The temptation is to immediately jump to the practical applications and the latest acronyms, the Latin, because that's what you hear in meetings.
But if you don't first spend that disciplined time studying the core underlying principles, the philosophical or legal foundations, the Greek, you end up just sounding like you know the terminology. You lack the foundational knowledge to use it effectively or argue about it rigorously.
You'll misuse jargon. Your communication will be imprecise.
And as scholars like Mendelssohn have pointed out, this kind of sequential learning is all about building a mental architecture that resists that contamination. You build a strong conceptual framework first.
So after you've learned your Greek, what comes next, before you're even allowed to start on serious rhetoric?
Next come these essential pre-rhetoric drills. Quintilian calls them the progymnasmata. And these were not busy work, they were mandatory cognitive exercises.
Okay, so what did these drills actually look like, and how do they translate into skills we need right now?
They were really specific exercises designed to develop cognitive and stylistic flexibility. First, the pupils would have to paraphrase Aesop's fables in just simple, clear language.
Okay, so that forces you to synthesize, to be clear.
Exactly. Then they would move on to a freer paraphrase, where they were allowed to abridge or embellish the original, as long as they didn't lose the essential meaning.
Ah, so that develops stylistic flexibility, the ability to tell the same story 5 different ways for 5 different audiences.
Precisely. They also had to practice writing aphorisms, these general, memorable propositions and character sketches, what he called ethologiae, which forced them to embody and describe different personalities.
So all these drills together develop synthesis, clear articulation, and the ability to map your meaning to your audience's needs.
Which is absolutely critical when a manager has to present the same Q3 results to, say, the engineering team.
Simple language, facts.
And then to the board.
Embellished strategic language, maybe with a few memorable aphorisms thrown in. Okay, let's turn this into a skill-building exercise for everyone listening. We'll call this the microdrill, the paraphrase challenge.
All right. I want you to select a single, dense paragraph from something you had to read recently. It could be an industry report, a legal document, a technical spec sheet, anything complicated.
Step 1, rewrite it in the plain style. Use simple, common words. You're aiming for the clarity of that first Aesop paraphrase. Your only goal is to transmit the information clearly.
Step 2, now rewrite it again, but this time use deliberate embellishments, strong verbs, figures of speech, memorable language. Your goal is to make it stick with a general audience, like that freer paraphrase. You want to amplify the message, but without losing the original meaning.
Mastering this flexibility is mastering the core of adaptable style.
And from the disciplined, quiet environment of these classroom drills, Quintilian then pushes his student out into the real world. He gives this huge warning in Book I about living in isolation solitaria et veludum bradica vita.
Living, as it were, in the shade. He says it leads to one of 2 big problems.
Either mental sluggishness, because you never compare yourself to anyone, or this weird mix of arrogance and timidity.
Because when you finally do enter public life, you're dazzled by the unfamiliar sunlight. Caligate in Seoul, like a creature that's only ever lived in the dark.
It's a fascinating argument. He's saying that relying only on private practice, writing your presentation in a draft, rehearsing it alone in your office, is totally insufficient.
You're training in a vacuum.
A controlled vacuum, yeah. You have to get used to noise, to crowds, to public life. You need real-world friction and feedback.
And he uses the ultimate example for training against that friction, the great Greek orator Demosthenes.
He supposedly studied on the seashore, right in the middle of the deafening roar of the breakers.
Why?
So that he wouldn't be unnerved by the inevitable uproar of the public assembly. The shouting, the interruptions, he was training for the noise.
Think about the modern equivalent of that, speaking in front of a live Zoom audience where notifications are popping up, people are interrupting.
Or technical glitches are happening, or you're trying to deal with passive-aggressive comments from a hostile colleague in a meeting.
Or just trying to present a huge report on a chaotic Monday morning when nobody's had enough coffee. The cognitive load in those environments is the same as the roar of the waves.
The lesson is so clear. If you only practice when it's quiet and safe, you will be completely overwhelmed when the environment turns hostile. We have to actively desensitize ourselves to distraction.
Which brings us to another exercise to build that mental resilience. Let's do a mental rehearsal, the public noise drill.
Okay. Pick a complex, thorny section of a presentation or a demanding document you're working on, something that requires deep concentration, and you're going to practice delivering it aloud.
But you need to find a distracting environment. If you can't get to a busy coffee shop, just play some loud, slightly distracting music, or even have an argumentative radio show playing in the background while you recite your part.
The goal isn't just to memorize the words. It's to maintain your concentration, your vocal control, and your physical poise despite the chaos. Just like Demosthenes training against the waves.
Because if you can maintain control of your message and your body when there's chaos all around you, you will seem utterly unflappable in an actual meeting. And that establishes incredible ethos through your physical composure. Okay, so the speaker has character, they have training, they have good habits. Now they need to learn how to actually build an argument.
And for this, Quintilian provides this universal, rigorous framework for analyzing any dispute. It's known as the three status, or the three bases.
This part of Quintilian from Book 7 is maybe the most valuable thing for conflict resolution in the modern world.
I think so. He argues that every single question, whether it's specific or general, falls into one of three natural issues. This is how you categorize and structure every argument you will ever make or receive.
And what are those three bases?
First is an, sit. Conjecture, did it happen? Is the fact true? This deals with existence.
Okay. Step 1, fact-finding.
Step 2 is quid sit. Definition. What is it? What term actually applies to this action? For example, was it an accident or was it manslaughter?
You have that third?
Quel sit. Quality. What kind of act or motive was it? Was it excusable? Justified? Was it legal? Was it dishonorable?
The genius of this, as you said, is the sequence. It's a required sequence. You have to establish the fact and sit before you can define the issue. Quid sit.
And only then can you argue the motive or the justification. Quel sit.
So often modern arguments, especially the ones on social media or in heated office debates, just collapse immediately because people jump straight to judging the justification.
They jump straight to quail sit. They skip the hard work of establishing shared facts and agreed upon definitions.
Let's apply this to a really common conflict, an argument between friends or partners. Suppose one partner accuses the other of betrayal because they were late for a crucial event. They feel really hurt.
Okay, so if the accused person immediately jumps to quail sit and says, well, I was justified because the traffic was terrible, the argument just escalates because the injured person feels completely unheard. They have a different definition of the act.
So Quintilian would say they have to back up, go back to the bases. First, and sit. Did the action actually happen? Yes, I was late. Okay, we agree on that.
Then quid sit. What is the right term for this? Was this a mistake because of things I couldn't control? Or was it a deliberate betrayal of your trust?
You have to define the action before you can judge it. The emotional weight of betrayal is so different from mistake.
And only once you've established that definition, or at least identified it as the point of disagreement, can you move to quail sit. Was the action excusable? Was it justifiable? This structure gives you the rigor to stop disputes from just collapsing into emotional chaos. It forces both sides to clarify what they're actually arguing about.
This applies perfectly to so many professional settings. Investigative reporting, complex internal reports at work.
You start with, what's the evidence this happened? Then, how do we categorize it? And only then, what are the legal or ethical implications?
Now, to find the actual material for these arguments, the facts, the definitions, the qualities, Quintilian talks about the loci communes, the commonplaces.
And he's really clear that these are not boilerplate speeches or, generic filler.
That's a huge distinction because today we use the word commonplace to mean cliché or something trite.
But Quintilian saw them as powerful strategies for invention, for discovering or generating material that's relevant to a specific case.
They're basically a systematic mental checklist.
Exactly. They help you make sure you haven't missed a crucial line of defense or attack when you're preparing a complex argument. They're derived from these universal categories like analyzing the person involved, the causes, the intent. The contrary argument is what it's similar to.
So if I'm defending someone, I can check the person commonplaces. Do they have the character to do this? Do they have a history of doing the opposite?
Right. Or if you're writing a proposal, you could use the commonplaces checklist to make sure your arguments aren't one-dimensional. You check what brought this idea about. You check contraries, what happens if we don't do this. And you check similitude. How is this like that successful thing we did last year?
So it's a way to generate robust case-by-case reasoning.
Exactly. As scholars like Leff have analyzed, argumentation for Quintilian isn't abstract logic, it's a social practice. The commonplaces give you a disciplined way to find the raw material you need to fill your status framework.
Okay, so we've got the argument structure. How do we actually deliver it? Quintilian has very specific advice for the opening, the exordium, and the statement of facts, the narratio.
The exordium is your opening move. It's designed to secure goodwill, attention, and a readiness to learn. But here's the subtle, high-level trick. Quintilian says the most attractive opening is one that appears improvised. It often draws material from what your opponent just said, or from something that just happened in the room.
So it makes the whole speech seem extempore, like it's happening spontaneously, even if it was all planned out.
Even if it was thoroughly elaborated, as he puts it. It's controlled artistry. It makes your preparation invisible. Instead of just launching into your script, you find a way to reference the last thing said, or a visible objection from the audience, to create the appearance of spontaneous brilliance.
I love that. And what about the narratio, the statement of facts?
He is emphatic about this.
Yeah.
It has to be clear, lucid, and brief. You have to avoid high-flown language or magnificence unless it's truly appropriate for the facts you're laying out.
And what's the most important rule for the narratio?
But do not argue. Save your arguments for the proofs. If you mix your facts and your arguments, if your statement of events is already riddled with biased adjectives and strategic framing, you lose all credibility right away.
The audience feels like they're being spun, not informed. The facts have to stand on their own.
Absolutely.
Let's use a concrete example. That project update to skeptical senior leadership. You know they're already resistant because of past cost overruns.
Okay, so you start your exordium by drawing a point directly from their previous skeptical comments, the opponent's speech.
So instead of just saying, today I want to talk about Project Delta.
Right. You say something like, last week, our CFO raised some crucial concerns about the resource allocation for Project Delta. I wanted to address those head-on because we share that concern.
It immediately secures attention and goodwill.
Then, in the narratio, you use plain, everyday language to state the facts. What happened, who was involved, when the deadline was missed, by how much. You reserve any splendor of eloquence, the dramatic, persuasive arguments about why it was missed and how it's actually a good thing for the later sections. The proofs.
That separation is so important. It avoids the impression that you're just spinning the facts to cover yourself. You present the evidence objectively first, and that earns you the right to argue about it later.
And this is hard to do when emotions are high, so let's give the listener another drill to really lock this in. Thought experiment. Fact versus proof in narrative.
Okay. Take a single paragraph that details a contentious sequence of events. It could be a mistake at work, a political decision you disagree with, or a relationship conflict where you were accused of something.
Now, rewrite that paragraph. Your mission is to strip out all of the argumentative language, all the subjective framing, all the proof.
Make sure that what's left is strictly a neutral statement of fact. If you find yourself using words like clearly, unnecessarily, obviously, or unfortunately, you've slipped back into argument.
The finished narratio should be so plain and unadorned that an outside observer could read it and not know whose side you're on or what conclusion you want them to reach. That's the goal.
All right, moving on to the third big part of rhetoric, style, or elocutio. This is all about how you choose your words and shape your sentences. And surprisingly, for someone who's often seen as a champion of high style, Quintilian starts with modesty.
He starts with appropriateness.
Decorum.
What does that mean exactly? Decorum, for Quintilian, means using every word appropriately. He says there's a place for almost any word, as long as it's suitable for the subject. You have to avoid words that are, beneath the dignity of the subject or that are just indecent.
So the standard is context and audience expectation.
Right. And he also gets into this tension between following the rules of grammar, what he calls correctness or orthopoeia, and just being an irritating, fussy academic.
The grammar police.
Exactly. He argues that language rules come from usage and from example, not from some abstract reason. So yes, we should stick to correct forms, but we have to rigorously avoid ostentatious pedantry. Don't try to use long, obsolete words just to sound smart. Don't be a stickler for rules nobody follows anymore.
That is so relevant for professionals today who have to talk to both technical and general audiences. Your style has to be flexible.
It's critical. As Quintilian says, you have to use one style to stir emotions, another to conciliate, and you have to vary between the simple, the middle, and the magnificent styles depending on what part of the speech you're in or who you're talking to.
So if you're giving a presentation to a room full of engineers, clarity and precision are everything. Flowery language is a distraction.
But if you're giving a pep talk to the sales team, you need that enthusiasm, that emotional amplification. Using technical jargon just to prove how smart you are in that context completely violates decorum. It just alienates everyone.
So decorum means serving the needs of the moment. Now, what about when the moment demands real persuasion and energy? How do we make our case vivid?
Quintilian leans heavily on two techniques for this: amplification and imagery.
Amplification is about heightening the effect. He talks about one key type, accumulation or conjury.
Which is piling up words or sentences that mean basically the same thing, but they increase in force. It's a rhetorical crescendo.
So instead of just stating a fact one time, you repeat it with different, slightly more urgent language, and you build this undeniable momentum.
Yes. For instance, if you're describing a need for swift action, you don't just say, "This is important." You use accumulation. You say, "It is essential. It is fundamental, it is irreversible, and frankly, it is unmissable." That repetition and escalation compels attention.
And then there's imagery. Hypotyposis. This is about transforming a dry statement, a piece of data, a statistic, into a full sensory picture.
Exactly. A picture designed to move the audience and implant the scene directly into their imagination. Quintilian's own example is so powerful. Because if you just state that a town was stormed, it has the curtness of a military dispatch. It doesn't really hit you emotionally.
Right.
But if you expand that single word into a full sensory description, seeing the flames pouring from the temple, hearing the crash of falling roofs, the wailing of women and children as they flee, you make the audience see the consequences. You move them from just intellectual awareness to emotional empathy.
Okay, let's apply this to modern business communication, which is so often full of dry metrics. Say you're trying to convince management to invest in a new supply chain solution because the old one keeps failing.
The dry metric is, we experienced 12 instances of logistical breakdown last quarter, resulting in a 15% revenue loss. That's a fact, but it doesn't move anyone.
So how do you use hypotyposis?
You paint the scene. That 15% loss wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. That was the site of 3 empty delivery trucks sitting idle in the Texas heat, engines broken, while our key client waited hours for components that never arrived, components they needed to launch their flagship product. We didn't just lose revenue, we betrayed their trust.
Wow. You've turned the statistic into a visible failure scenario. The image has to move the soul.
Exactly. Okay, let's wrap this section up with a really important mental drill that tests your mastery of decorum and style. We'll call it thought experiment. The 3 levels of style.
This will help you determine if you're using the right level of language for the moment. Pick a draft email, a short professional post, or even just a presentation slide title you're working on right now.
And you're going to rewrite the opening sentence using 3 distinct levels of style based on Quintilian's principles of suiting the occasion and avoiding affectation.
Level 1, the plain style. Simple, clear, common, everyday words. Your only goal is to transmit information. So something like Q3 revenue has been summarized in this report.
Level 2, the magnificent style. This is elevated vocabulary, figures of speech, intense adjectives. You're aiming to impress or stir high emotion. Something like, the seminal forces that sculpted our Q3 performance are definitively illuminated in the comprehensive figures detailed herewith.
Which sounds a little ridiculous.
It almost always does. Which brings us to level 3, the appropriate style. This is the one that best fits your actual audience and occasion. It's usually a blend. It avoids the stiffness of the magnificent style, but it elevates the pure clarity of the plain style. just enough to be engaging.
So it might be something like, here are the core findings from Q3, showing where we hit our growth targets and where we face immediate challenges.
That's the one. And the appropriate style requires the most discipline. It's the hardest to write because it demands that you know your audience's tolerance for complexity and emotional investment perfectly.
Okay, we've moved from the intense control needed for structure and style into something a little lighter. The strategic use of humor and wit.
And Quintilian, echoing Cicero before him, saw that humor is one of the most powerful and also one of the most dangerous tools an orator has.
Michael Fontaine, who studies ancient humor, notes that Quintilian agrees that wit is massively effective, but it is loaded with peril.
At its core, for humor to be effective, it has to be about making fun of or stigmatizing vice in an acute, clever way.
So it has to have a point.
It has to have a point. And if it's cruel or mean-spirited or if it targets genuine misfortune, it's not funny. And worse, it completely destroys your ethos.
So what's the strategic function of this kind of wit in a high-stakes professional environment?
Well, jests have two main strategic functions, according to Book 6. First, they can dispel unpopularity generated by bitter criticism.
So if you've been attacked, a clever, maybe self-deprecating joke can instantly diffuse the tension.
Exactly. It shows you're above the fray. And second, jests can be used to attack the character or appearance of an opponent when it's appropriate. Though Quintilian gives a huge warning here that this is a powerful weapon and you should use it very sparingly and with great caution.
It's like a rhetorical judo move. You catch your opponent off guard with speed and subtlety, you make the audience laugh, and in doing so, they temporarily side with you against the target.
It's an instant goodwill generator, but only if the joke lands right.
And Quintilian, ever the systematist, actually maps the sources of these jests directly onto the loci communes, the argument topics we talked about earlier.
He does. Jests can be drawn from hyperbole exaggeration, from definition, or from irony.
Let's look at some of his classic examples. What about hyperbole?
He cites this famous joke by Publius Oppius about the family of the Lentuli. Apparently, the children in this family were always smaller than their parents. So Oppius joked that the whole race would eventually perish by propagation.
That's pretty dark.
It is, but it's a shocking, cleverly delivered exaggeration based on an observation. It's funny because it applies this cold, logical mechanism to an absurd outcome.
Okay, what about irony? Irony is saying the opposite of what you mean and forcing the audience to do the work to find the real, often painful, meaning.
The advocate Afer made this wonderfully subtle use of irony. There was a politician who was complaining bitterly about being forced to accept a provincial government, a job that everyone knew he had been desperately trying to get.
So Afer replied with this mock solemnity.
Well then, do something for your country's sake.
Oh, that's brilliant, because the surface meaning, do your duty, is totally reasonable.
But the underlying shared knowledge in the audience is that the politician is lying. The irony makes the audience complicit in the joke, and it leads them to conclude the politician is a hypocrite without Afer ever having to call him a liar.
Which saves Afer's ethos. He seems restrained and clever, not just aggressive.
And wit can also be drawn from ambiguity, a little wordplay. Cicero would sometimes use subtle phrasing to hint at a scandal without saying it outright, which allows the audience's mind to fill in the scandalous blanks.
That's safer than direct slander because you have plausible deniability.
Exactly. Now, this level of strategic humor requires phenomenal control and emotional intelligence. So we need a drill to practice using it ethically. Let's do a mental rehearsal. The ironic defense.
Imagine you're a teacher or a manager or a team lead, and you're addressing a restless group that has complained bitterly about how difficult or complex your assignments or your workload is.
Instead of arguing the strict justice of the workload, using that quail sit status, you're going to deploy a light, self-deprecating irony, kind of like Afer's style, to win them over.
So the prompt for you listening is, how can you use language that says the opposite of what you mean to lead the audience to the conclusion you want?
For example, instead of getting defensive about how rigorous you are, you could say something like, I apologize that I haven't been taxing your minds quite enough lately with these simple challenges. Clearly, we need to raise the bar next week.
The irony assumes they're competent, even superior, and it gently deflects the complaint while also encouraging them to rise to the challenge.
It avoids a direct confrontation, it preserves your goodwill, and it uses humor to reinforce the value of the hard work. It's a really high-level application of ethos combined with a jest.
We've covered character, preparation, structure, and style. Now we get to the final two parts of rhetoric: execution, or actio, delivery, and memory. This is where all the training hits the physical body.
Delivery, which is your voice and your gesture, is what appeals directly to the eye and the ear. And those are the two senses through which Quintilian says emotion reaches the soul.
So he saw delivery not as some superficial polish, but as absolutely essential to persuasion. A brilliant argument delivered badly is a failure.
Exactly. And he offers this stern, timeless warning against being theatrical. The highest expression of oratorical art in gesture, he says, is the concealment of its existence.
That is a critical lesson for modern public speaking, especially in this era that's so obsessed with performance.
We have to rigorously avoid staginess, excessive facial expressions, imitating vices, like acting drunk or these big theatrical movements. You control your body with the poise of your whole trunk, not with quick, fidgety movements of your fingers or your head.
That's a direct critique of that modern, over-rehearsed style that confuses acting with persuasion. Quintilian wants authenticity, controlled movement, where the gesture reinforces the point instead of distracting from it.
He also stresses the voice. Voice quality, both quantity and quality, has to be strong and flexible. He points out common faults like dropping your voice at the end of a sentence or using a hideous chanting intonation, which happens when you're tired or nervous.
A strong, flexible voice is what allows an orator to use a crescendo, or a sudden loud burst to great effect, perfectly matching the style of the speech.
Right. Now let's talk about memory. And we don't mean just simple rote memorization. We mean the mechanics of recalling your points extemporaneously under pressure.
And Quintilian shows this really powerful technique, the memory track.
The memory track is essentially using spatial memory for your text. He advises the speaker to commit their material to writing and then to learn it by heart from the exact same tablets or written pages.
So the mind's eye fixes on the lines, the layout, the formatting.
And it creates tracks to guide him. Eventually, the speaker can talk as if they were reading aloud from their notes, even without looking at them, because the visual memory of the page itself triggers the content.
In a world of digital notes and presentation slides, this is so relevant. If you just use the same standard template for all your presentations, you're missing a huge opportunity.
You should be using physical cues, formatting, distinct organizational structures in your digital notes, color code your arguments, bold the counter-arguments, use a specific font for your conclusions. You're creating those mental tracks that will help you recall everything when you're speaking.
So you're using the visual structure of your notes to trigger the spoken content in a reliable sequence. If you change the format every time, you erase the memory track.
And you're back to just rote learning, which is much less reliable under pressure. And finally, Quintilian just emphasizes that you have to practice consistently and frequently. He concludes that habit and exercise chiefly beget facility. This is a long-term game. You build rhetorical agility through constant monitored repetition.
He's a demanding coach. He doesn't promise quick fixes, he promises proficiency through disciplined habit.
Which leads us to our final micro-assignment for you, the listener. This is a check on a physical habit, which is often the hardest thing to change.
Okay, here it is. Micro assignment, delivery fault correction. I want you to identify one key delivery fault you tend to commit.
It could be vocal fillers, like it could be restless movement, fidgeting, maybe you drop your voice when you get nervous, or even, as Quintilian lists, stopping suddenly and courting applause by silence.
And I want you to consciously monitor and correct that single fault in your next 2 significant professional interactions. It could be a presentation, a hard conversation, a team meeting.
You're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to actively change one physical, habitual behavior through sustained conscious effort. #tag outro.
What a deep dive. Quintilian. He's demanding, he's rigorous, and he's profoundly humane. He offers this complete communication system that covers everything from the speaker's character, the vir bonus,
all the way through deep pedagogical training, argumentative structure with the 3 status, stylistic flexibility with decorum,
and physical execution with delivery and memory. His system is, you could argue, more necessary now than it was 2,000 years ago. It's a structured defense against the noise and the imprecision of modern discourse.
And that emphasis on the vir bonus is exactly why we have to end by returning to the central ethical complexity of it all. Quintilian actually acknowledges that the perfect orator, who's committed to the state or the greater good, might sometimes have to make a really painful decision.
How so?
He asks, if an orator knows that a worthy citizen is about to be unjustly condemned, Should he shrink from using necessary falsehoods if it's the only way to save that person? He even suggests an orator might have to use fraud-like methods to save the state itself in extraordinary circumstances.
That is a staggering concession. It's a moment where the good of the community, the vir bonus commitment, is placed above a strict adherence to universal truth in every single case.
It forces us to confront the true weight of ethical decision-making in high-stakes communication. It confirms that the commitment to character is complex. It's not simple.
And ultimately, Quintilian urges us to pursue all of this, to pursue eloquence, not for mercenary ends, not just to get a raise or win a sale,
But for the lasting rewards that the soul and contemplation can give. He asks us to view our communication not just as a transaction, but as a noble art.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to carry into your week. If you treat your daily communication, your next challenging email, your next social media post, your most difficult conversation, as a noble art and an act of character, rather than just a quick mercenary transaction, how fundamentally does that shift your behavior and your long-term credibility tomorrow?